Today's event is titled From Studio to Cityscape, Collaboration and Conservation of Painted Outdoor Sculpture. I'd now like to introduce Fula, Head of Collections at the Getty Institute. Thanks, Fula. What's here we go.
Okay. I can be here. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stavroula Golfomitsu, or Vula. I'm the head of collections at the Getty Conservation Institute, and we are delighted to present this panel in partnership with the Cripps Institute for Cultural Conservation at the University of Melbourne and the National Gallery of Victoria. Tonight's event forms part of the GCI's Outdoor Sculpture project, through which we're working to strengthen capacity in an underserved and highly specialized area of conservation. The panel accompanies our 5-day workshop, Treatment Strategies for Painted Outdoor Sculpture, where participants examine the challenges and long-term care of painted outdoor works. This is a field with particular conservation complexities, as tonight's conversation will make clear. We're especially pleased that our colleagues at the Cripps Institute will be in dialogue with artists working directly in this medium, because of course, as we know, the artist's perspective is essential to the responsible stewardship of these works. Our discussion this evening is led by one of our workshop instructors, Dr. Caroline Chi, from the Cripps Institute at the University of Melbourne, and she's a specialist in wall paintings and mural conservation. Her research spans historic and contemporary murals, cross-cultural collaboration, and the technical study of painted surfaces, including significant projects in China and Australia. She brings expertise in materials analysis, heritage practice, and collaborative conservation, offering a rich foundation for conversation with artists about process, place, and cultural stewardship. She's joined by Eliza O'Donnell, Dr. Eliza O'Donnell, a paintings conservator also from the Cripps Institute at the University of Melbourne, whose research centers on Indonesian and Southeast Asian contemporary art. Eliza's work brings together material analysis, technical art history, and long-form artist interviews to explore cultural exchange, attribution, and artistic practice in Australia-Indonesia contexts. Her close engagement with Indonesian artists, archives, and grassroots initiatives makes her exceptionally well-placed to lead conversations about materials, processes, and cross-cultural practice. I would like to thank, of course, the Cripps Institute, but also Stamatina Hasiotis. So probably I'm the only person in this room that I can pronounce her name correctly, being Greek. And Katie Payne for organizing and promoting this event. And please join me in welcoming Caroline and Eliza and our artists, Ling and Jumaadi. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we're going to jump over to the panel segment of our discussion. Who do you reckon will be starting first? Who should I pass the mic to? Beautiful.
Yeah, great. Good. And thank you, Vula, for the introduction. So my name is Eliza O'Donnell. I'm a Mary Luckton postdoctoral fellow in the second year of my fellowship at the Cripps Institute. My research explores the history of Australia-Indonesia cultural exchange, examining how materiality, art-making practices, and cultural knowledge shift and evolve when Indonesian artists move to Australia. This research has been developed in close collaboration with 9 contemporary artists, and Jumaadi is one of the people who I'm working with. Jumaadi lives and works between studios in Yogyakarta and Surabaya in Indonesia, and in Sydney, where he holds a 2-year studio artist residency at Art Space in Woolloomooloo. Working across painting, drawing, sculpture, performance, and installation, Jumaadi's practice ranges from small gouache on paper works to large-scale buffalo hide paintings and Wayang performances. And as of last year, he now adds public sculpture to his wide-ranging practice with the unveiling of his first permanent public artwork, Upside Down Garden at Barangaroo South in Sydney. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion, Jumaadi, and flying down from Sydney for the event. I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself a little more and share about your recent work, Upside Down Garden.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, my name is, I'm not used to talking in public actually. And we spend a lot of time in our kind of quiet and lonely studios with radio as friends, long-term friendship. As Eliza was saying that I was born in Surabaya. It's a northeast part of Java. But I've been here in Australia in the last 30 years almost. You come in here as a young, sort of energetic, optimistic. I'm still very optimistic about the world. Yeah, I just come back from my studio in Surabaya a couple of days ago and drop my bag in art space and come here. Also, I have a studio in Yogyakarta, which is, I feel it is a bit more lively in terms of art production and art exhibitions and meeting sort of interesting like curators coming from different part of the world, like in art space in Sydney. Is it about the work?
Yeah. So we had some images of the Upside Down Garden, which will rotate on the slides, but maybe a little bit about that work, what it's made from.
Yeah. Yeah, so specifically, I was going to talk about this Upside Down Garden project. I was never making sort of metal work or work out of metal that big before. It was always working in the kitchen table with like 10 by 15 meters of 15 centimeters on paper, like gouache or watercolor. And one of those work is going to be exhibited also at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, I think about in 2 weeks' time. They collected in 2015, by the way. But when I was asked to make that work, Upside Down Garden, in 2019, toward the end of it, of course, sadly, we all know that it was then turned into kind of silence moment when the COVID was there, and it was a bit tricky. Conversation changes and things like that, and the work completed like 5 years later or 6 years later, and they just recently installed toward the end of last year. But this is paper cutout work that I was commissioned also by the Art Gallery of New South Wales. It originally was painted cloth or textile coming from Indian epic of Ramayana, but was used as a trading currency. Somehow it ended up in Sulawesi, a lot of them. Can you come back to the original work? Is that okay?
I think it will cycle through.
Cycle through. Yeah. Sorry, that's all right. Yeah, yeah. And that was the Ramayana story. Coming from India to Bali to Sulawesi. Somehow the work was then collected by the Art Gallery of New South Wales from Bali in 1970s or something like that. 200 years later. Yeah. Coming back to the Upside Down Garden, the commission take much longer to complete and to negotiate, renegotiate. My experience on that time was not good. It's still not that good now. Yeah. And the price of the metal was growing up too during the COVID time. And so a lot of shifting and changing in the ideas. Also, first time that I make work to understand that urgency was not the question. We have to delay everything and plan everything, working in a team. Communication was not just merely from my drawings, it has to be accompanied by articulation of verbal words and mathematical, like coming from engineering point of view. And the space was also articulated by the architect to where my work was going to occupy the space. And I learned a bit more about things on that time. Yeah.
Got a follow-up question. I think, on the slide now and also on these front tables, you can see some examples of Jumaadi's work, which are on buffalo hide supports. So it sort of speaks to that idea of translating your, your sketches, your buffalo hide works into these larger scale aluminium suspended sculptural pieces. So I was wondering if you could speak a little about your involvement in the fabrication process for Upside Down Garden. How hands-on were you in realising the finished works and collaborating with the fabricators to interpret and execute your designs?
As I mentioned before, thank you, Eliza. As I mentioned before, it's not natural for me to work with a group of people. It was always about myself and the brush and the water, color, and the paper. And all of a sudden, it was becoming a planning systems, and which everything have to be delayed. You have to think about it for and we will have a meeting, another meeting, like in 2 weeks' time. So that is the scale of the work, and it's quite large and metal, and the painting pigment were enamel. This we sit down like 6 months earlier to choose particular color, and myself and the curator and the architect was like having long morning sessions, like a workshop, to decide the color that was in the standard of Australian standard. And we have to reimagine again that the color might change, the shine may add into the aesthetic. So 6 months later, I come to the studio, someone else painted it, and it wouldn't be possible to paint it in my studio. That was one of the reasons, because to shift and to turn the work require some kind of heavy equipment. And the paint application was also, but I was watching some of the process and involved in that way. And if there were like some kind of questions or not quite right to the way we would like to have the color on the work, then we could have a little bit more conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. And earlier today we were talking about that process of, I guess, selecting the colours, you sort of translating your original like watercolour original works into these sort of other large scale. So that process of scaling up the motifs and translating the these images into the large metal sculptures. And I feel like this is a timely slide to talk about that a little. Would you be able to speak about sort of the translation from these small, I might actually hold some of them up, smaller works into the very large scale permanent sculpture? Yeah.
Yeah, this work is made out of like buffalo hide, which we carve, like traditional wayang kulit or shadow puppets in Central and East Java, and also in Bali. I've studied that for the last 25 years or something, and I get involved with that. And they actually quite personal. You can hold them. Some puppet master, they sleep with them, like they carry and they twist around. And sometimes when I make this work also, I reimagine myself as a puppet master to get the work closer to my understanding, to increase the sensibility of it. Yeah, but the translation of it into larger scale of sculptural metal and brutal sort of work. I mean, we were trying it. We tried. Yeah.
Is it aluminium? No.
It's aluminium, and I think there were discussion of the price of the steel was a bit too high, and but then also there was a discussion of the weight, which we'll have to change the engineering strategy to how we kind of install it and taking care of it, like in the maintenance. So it is aluminium.
Yeah. Carolyn, did you have any?
I'd like to introduce Matthew or Ling. Matthew, I was going to read your bio, but all I'm just going to say is Matt has worked with me on an intensive that I run on street art with our students, and he's been very generous in sharing his knowledge of graffiti, street art, and painted outdoor sculpture. But most memorably, he's just, and I know people who are watching this can't see it, there's a 2.5 metre sculpture behind us. We've just spent 5-10 minutes dragging that sculpture across campus. And I am hiding my head behind the sculpture because I do not, as a conservator, want to be associated with the way this object has been transported. There are a few conservators in the audience today. I can see that I'll be handing out condition recording templates shortly and asking for recommendations for treatment. So and in saying that, working with Matt, it's always been a comfortable conversation to have about graffiti, about street art, and about sculpture. So I'll just hand over to you to speak about some of the works that we're seeing and just this.
Okay, so yeah, as you might have gathered, my background is from graffiti. That's still underpins everything that I do. It's turned into more traditional street art. It's turned into sculptural work, a lot of mural work, conceptual photography and installations. So this one little thing is turned into such a broad spectrum. Some of the images like we're seeing now, there's a series called The Allure of Gold, which is literally finding things that would have been of value but have been discarded and then painting them entirely gold to reintroduce the idea of value. Now, something like that, it's just not even going to fit into a gallery. So I've got to go out and find it. It's all opportunistic and it lives on through photos. There's some installation work I can do off of it. Things such as the sculptural pieces, weirdly enough, that was born out of pure frustration through a different semi-sculptural piece, I guess. It was a 3D rendered wall that was peeling off a wall that I was asked to paint. And then while I was in the building, I saw other sculptural pieces that had faux graffiti on it. And being a graffiti writer, I was quite annoyed that they didn't hire someone who actually knew what they were doing to produce this, particularly in a city like Melbourne where there's an amazing scene with it full of talent. Why wouldn't you lean on that? And then I realized that there isn't anybody doing it. So I created this piece as a proof of concept and then linked with another friend who was curating a larger project, and he asked if I wanted to work on that and upsize it and, taking the graffiti attitude of bigger is always better. I jumped at that, and now there's one of these, the same model in the city that's about 5 meters tall, and that started as a 3D render based off a spray can that I depressurized and basically beat the hell out of it with a hammer until I got the, I went through quite a lot of spray cans until I got the shape that I wanted. Created the 3D render and then had it produced using a 5-axis CNC machine that's normally used, I think, for automotive concepts.
We're just going to stop you for a moment because for people who can see, an image will come up in a moment of this big can that's on the public artwork. I asked Matt what was the main material, the support material. Can anyone, if they've seen it, anyone got any ideas what the support material might be? What the body of the work is made from? Anyone got any suggestions? Any ideas?
It's a combination. Is it a composite of two materials?
I don't know. So a lot of what I do is about results. And if you talk about like the actual technical process, with graffiti, we mix our own paints, mix blending things, all sorts of stuff, brake fluid in inks, whatever, like anything that gets the job done. This in particular is high density foam, like essentially styrofoam that's been carved, and then a 2-part epoxy prop making material that's impact resistant. It's multiple layers of that to give it a hard shell, and then I don't know how many layers of white paint on that, and the actual nozzle is 3D printed. This piece, so that's the big one. That's the same material in terms of styrofoam, high density foam core around a steel armature on a big concrete plinth and bolted in to give it the weight and make it safe more than anything. And then the coating, rather than this 2-part sort of prop making stuff, it's a industrial hard coat. What that is, not a clue. I'd have to go back to the fabricators and then ask them who they got to do it, and then ask what's actually in it. It creates an interesting effect. So like if you go to that one in the city, you can feel that one side is kind of smooth and one side is a little bit dimpled because it would have been sprayed on its side, and the mixture goes off so fast that you can feel that the smooth side's where gravity's pulled down and the other side is where it started trying to drip, but it's cured, within seconds.
Jumaadi, we were talking about when we were in the studio before about colour. You were quite had a strong belief about the colour, and can you talk us through how you went through the colour selection process? What were you presented with by the architect to choose your colours?
I mean, with Goas, it has a lot of lime, so to make it opaque, and then with this enamel is kind of something else, and because of the scale of the work, you get this large yellow or yeah, and then we need to do that workshop as I was mentioning it earlier on, and we bring a lot of like different catalogs of Australian standard, and but I usually work with a lot of like intuitions, like this red might have a bit yellow into it, or it has also toward magenta or something like that. And also the green, I have particular relation to like olive greens and things like that. And it takes some time for everyone to actually to agree to that color. But when we agree, because so many choices here, and then we do testing and stuff, and we have to eliminate and then just keep with the 8 particular colors. Then I mean, we were working like as if it was like notes in the music or something like that. So then we were allowed to play that particular range of colors. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep, certainly. Okay, I'd just like to discuss ephemerality in artworks. And Ling, I'd like to put this one to you. You're having worked in graffiti scene, street art, how do you feel with pieces of your work in terms of their longevity? What do you think is conservators' role in that, or maintenance roles? We had a little bit of a discussion about maintenance, but where do you see the conservators' role in the care for your artwork? Or is it something that once the artwork is out there, then whatever happens to it is you're comfortable with?
I'm pretty comfortable with whatever happens to it. I've done pieces that you go and paint out in the street and they're gone in hours, and it becomes really important then to just document it, make sure you get your photos, make sure that when you say that it's happened and someone goes, well, did it? And you can show them that it actually did. But I guess as my career has turned to full-time art and producing things on a larger scale and a more professional scale, that hasn't necessarily shifted my perception, but it's shifted the requirements of what I'm producing, because if people are investing in me and what I do, it needs to last longer, or it can't be gone in hours unless that is the project. At the same time, things like the spray can, that has a protective coating on it, but it's designed in a way where if people do more tags on it, if people interact with it however they choose, it's built for that. So it can, there's lots of extra tags on that now, and you wouldn't know because I painted it with lots of tags. So it just becomes part of the aesthetic. And I like that because as I'm producing things in public, it's a public space. It's there for people to interact with it as they see fit, whether that's positive, negative, anything in between. That's up to them individually, because even what I see as positive and negative is going to be different to what someone else sees as positive and negative. As far as conservation goes, for what I'm producing, I honestly don't think about it. I think the furthest I go in terms of that sense, because I'm trying to produce the work now, I'm not thinking necessarily about 50 or 100 years or when I'm long gone. I think that the closest I go to that is putting an isolation coat on before putting varnishes on my studio work. If you ask me even how some of this stuff ages, I don't know at times. That's why we do put protective coating, say, on murals. It's why we choose some paint brands over others, particularly like red pigments and things. They've been really, really notorious in spray paint for dropping out. So as graffiti and street art and, it's become an industry and become a career option for people, that's pushed technology and choices that we make, but it's not front of mind. It's just part of an ongoing conversation about, with me, with other artists.
On the topic of maintenance plans, Jumaadi, I wanted to ask you, in 2021, a draft maintenance plan for Upside Down Garden was written, and that's a publicly available document online. But as you noted, because of COVID and the time it takes to develop these large-scale projects, the actual work wasn't installed and unveiled until 2025. In the draft maintenance plan, said that the metalworks would be fabricated from aluminium or mild steel with a Dulux protective coating system. It sounds like that was eventually the materials that were used, but I was interested to know if there are other changes listed in the plan, and if the conservation of your works, perhaps related to like the colour fading and other issues, was addressed in the most up-to-date plan, if that was something you spoke about with the curators.
Yeah. Originally, it was in my mind, there were a lot of much more object, more than like 15 smaller and made out of aluminium. And then time passed by and becoming larger sculptures, only 6 of them, and a sound. And then we were also going deep into the light design of it, because there is a day mode and an evening mode as the presentation of the work. Yeah, but I couldn't follow all the discussion regarding of the production and the maintenance. Really, it was a lot of engineering consultations. Yeah, but I'm very glad that it was coming around into the aluminium ideas, because there were idea of that it could have been created with copper or steel. Some of them were with wood. Yeah.
You just touched on something we hadn't spoke about before, which was the sound element as well. Could you explain a little bit about that and your work with the composer in integrating the sound into the public work?
Yeah, I work with Michael Toisuta, and he is like sound designer and sound engineer, working for a lot of theater company here in Australia and overseas. And I do performance work like for Sydney Festival and for I've done quite a bit as a part of my my practice of like almost like a live movie with silhouette and shadows as an actor. For example, like when the falling leaves fall down like this, and the live music will make similar sound the way, or in contrast the way, or suggest another one, but it's all alive. So as the progression of the sculptural commission, the Department of Infrastructure, they are the caretaker of the work now, New South Wales Infrastructure. They actually offer us more funding into it with another element, which is the sound, or potentially was moving image, but we thought just stay on the sound. I don't want my image being in a competition with something else.
I recall reading the sound. Is it activated 3 times a day, in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening? Is that?
Yeah, I wish that Michael was here explaining it more about that, but he went quite far away from Sydney, like 4 hours into some kind of less occupied area, and he recorded the sound of natural sound, like 10 o'clock at night time. And the one of the idea was to eliminate any human presence into the sound. Because we were thinking of the garden, the upside down garden was also like some kind of garden that we create, coming from looking into like colonial garden and Balinese garden, Japanese garden, and then Mesopotamian garden, the history of garden. A lot of it was like colonial botanical garden, but then he found it really difficult to eliminate. Somehow there is a bit of sound of the aeroplane coming in, and or some kind of human presence into the sound. But then he brought the sound into the studio and mix it and reconstruct the sound into a composition of like maybe 5 minutes compositions. And we were reimagine that is happening also in Bali or in Indonesia. Bali is much more Hindu, which they also have a prayer call 3 times a day, just to remind us that we are connected with something else outside our being, rather than the economical connection or the social connections. And also in Java, we are Muslim. We have like 5 times prayer calls that was one of the fundamental desire of the work.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to come back to looking at the choice of materials. So when you have external fabricators involved, you've worked with external fabricators, or most of the time you do this work independently without a fabricator? Do you work with a fabricator, Ling?
Well, for these pieces, it's been with a fabricator.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'd have the patience to sit there and sculpt, something that big. Maybe once I got started, I'd get stuck into it, but I'm more interested in the process, and I like new technologies and going out and seeing and meeting with these fabricators, and seeing what they're doing and seeing how excited they were getting about it, because a lot of the time they're doing civil engineering pieces and stuff like that, like very, molds for concrete. Mm-hmm. And so, to see how excited they get about that, gets me more excited about producing it, and, having a team to work together is pretty amazing. So definitely when required, fabricators. If it was smaller scale, then, I can do that within my own studio and I don't need to have, a budget. So I guess it's dependent on the project, but for larger pieces like this, absolutely. And it's great learning about it and knowing how to do it, because, by me doing that, I can then share that with everyone in that studio. So now if anyone else needs to produce it, there's a whole team that, they're hopefully got a whole nother stream that they can add to their, their careers and practice.
When external fabricators are involved, how do you ensure your intended finished texture, colour, durability are achieved?
A lot of faith. No, there is an element of faith. Talking to people, seeing their body of work, yes, and understanding their process and what they do, and even how confidently they talk about it. So chatting to the guys from it was a group called Caber who I worked with for this. They were very certain about what they were doing. They had used these suppliers before in terms of having the protective, like the hard coat on it. Talking through all the engineering, what sort of weights we need, even building a special jig to essentially get the big piece onto a truck, without crushing it. So just, I guess, information and communication, builds confidence.
You mentioned that you often share what you learn through this process with colleagues in the studio. Does that come down to the point of technical specifications? Would you go to someone, I'm using this coating, this paint formulation? Does it get down to that level, or is it just something that you go, I've worked with this material and it's been good for this purpose, let's experiment with it? Are you really specific about what materials you use to a technical level?
At times, like we can, I really do love what I do, and that extends to really nerding out on it at times around, how to produce things, or, people will have their secret recipes of paint of like, I mix this with this, or I do this way. And, there was a really well-known mural artist who was saying, oh, I need to order these particular things. And like, because you're going to mix them all together and do this. And he was like, well, how do you know that? Like, why do you know my secret? And it's like, because we talk about them, we know, and share these things. But I prefer it to be an open book. Mm-hmm. The more I know, the more I can share, the better off everyone else is, and particularly the people around me. It's, yeah.
Jumaadi, I know that the upside down garden is sheltered in some way, and it has a timber ceiling above it. How do you feel about the potential for weathering and change? Would you welcome change in the materials in any way?
I have worked with aluminium before, and it can change. I think they kind of sensitive with the wind and salty water. sort of salty wind. Yeah, I mean, the business is done with me. Yeah. But, you know, they like you create them. They're like your children. Yeah.
I think we've got time for questions now. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, do any members of the audience have any questions for the arts?
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm one of Caroline and Eliza's colleagues at the Cripps Institute. I wonder if I can ask both of you, because you've scaled up, or you scale up from your studio or kitchen or whatever into these larger with fabricators, do you think a conservator now and again as part of that team would be an asset or not? In part of the production of the artwork, giving their input in terms of the longevity of materials, one material over another one. Do you think that would be good or not so good, or just get in the way?
I'd like to say that one.
I think it could be all of the above. And no, it's, again, I was talking about the idea of communication, knowledge, and developing an understanding of things. So would I necessarily want to have a conservator on every project and sort of dictating, oh no, don't use this material, don't use that, particularly when a lot of the time I just pick up whatever's in my studio and I use it. You know, that could become pretty cumbersome as a process, but working with conservators to expand my knowledge to then apply it in an ongoing way, absolutely. Like that's beneficial. I think a lot of the conversations we already had with Carolyn, we've geeked out about spray paint and, you know, how well ground down pigment is, and, you know, why you're looking at this spray paint when graffiti writers don't use it. You know, it's, yeah.
Oh, it would have been very, very useful if the initial workshop between us in the earlier team when they were conservator would have been giving us a lot more insight instead of just the engineering teams. I think there is something more, a lot of consideration into the art and also the human side of it, whereas the engineering was more a lot to do with the, you know, the strength or the yeah. But I guess like if I was to be honest, like for us on that time, the most important thing is the art. It's not just the appearance of it, and we were trained and we were used to the urgency of working on a small piece of paper. It was quite direct impact within minutes of the execution, and this thing were delayed by 5 years.
Yeah. Robin.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm Robin, colleague of Jonathan, Eliza and Caroline's. Question around where your practice fits with conservation as a lived practice. So you both talked about the traditions that you're in. Matt, you talked about the tradition of graffiti. And like I remember my son's friends graffitied everything from Belgrave to, you know, Richmond on the line, you know. Is it like there is a lived tradition there that continues, which you are part of, but also are contributing to the future of that tradition? And Jumaadi, you talked about much deeper, you know, thousands of years of generations of use of buffalo hide. And so I'm just wondering where you two see your contemporary practice as a conservation practice of the true traditions that you're representing through your embodiment of contemporary artists.
So just kind of comparing, so where I'm at versus where I was and how it relates. I think it's
people who came before you who kind of set up the, doing good.
Well, I think it's always a case of, trying to honour that past and that tradition. And, even now there will be, corporate installations I do, or I'm talking to other people and there might be advertising and they're like, oh, we might do some tags here. And like, hire a graffiti writer. Don't fake it. No AI, no, you have to honour this. We just had, was able to save a whole heap of about 30 metres of graffiti pieces from Richmond that were produced in 1991, and they've just been accepted as part of City of Melbourne's permanent collection. And these are really, really pivotal artists as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people would never have heard of them, but they've had a direct influence on the reason Melbourne has a huge mural culture, why it has a street art culture, why there's a thriving industry here around creative spaces. All of the tourism that we get, we wouldn't have that without that. So I, wherever possible, try to, ensure people are educated on that. And even if they don't like graffiti, I always say to them, you don't have to like it, but at least hate it from an educated perspective. So it still underpins everything that I do. And at times it can clash, it can contradict, which can be difficult, but I try to stay true to that wherever possible, because without that I wouldn't be where I am. Not sure if that answers the question, or yeah.
Yeah, I've been working with the buffalo hide. I think because I was getting a bit more, fortunate. Originally, I was like cutting it on cardboard because I was never trained in traditional sense. Always also like him, I grew up in the street in Indonesia, and cardboard was the easiest way to make image when I was working in Sydney. And later on, I do paper cut into larger scales. But the number of buffalo is also decreased by a lot. It was a culture where agrarian was the most supporting element of it. The buffalo was used as friends to farm rice. Maybe they also had a similar value to the price of human during the slavery times. In United States, they were all also working in the rice field. I did a residency in Charleston in South Carolina. Talking about tradition, so yeah, I mean, I guess like then we introduce again, like my role now as a contemporary artist to either to preserve or to articulate post-traditions situations. I guess my training was a lot to do with abstract expressionism, where negative spacing and positive space was very important to communicate visually. And I try to also to negotiate with traditional designs and introduce a lot of new patterns and those elements. And in Indonesia, and also shadow puppetry is no longer about shadow. It is about golden shine of the gamelan instruments and other lights. So the understanding of shadow within the performance is also slowly disappearing, which I very much concerned about it. In my performance, it's only shadow and light. That's why paper and overhead projector as a light source is becoming a very significant tool, because it is quite unforgiving. The light is there, but it casts really articulate shadow.
Thank you. Time for just one more question.
Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm another colleague of the Cripps staff. Matt, this is probably more a question for you. You commented that you're very aware that when you're creating works in a public space, they might change very quickly, and that's okay. And so your thinking about conservation and longevity maybe is not part of those works, but you talk about the documentation therefore being important. And I'm wondering how your approach then is, if you have an approach to preservation of that documentation, and whether you make that sort of, if you bring an archival sort of hat to that, and what type of documentation you take.
In terms of the type of documentation, it's expanding more and more because I'm sort of understanding the importance of that. So initially it might have been just a photo, and then it might have been many photos with an iPhone, better quality photos with, you know, digital SLR, a better digital SLR. Now I'm getting drone photos, time-lapsing with GoPros, using LiDAR to take 3D scans of things where possible, and then even using that within the process. So if you can't zoom out from something, you can just scan the wall and then zoom out from that. In terms of then how do I maintain those files, there's a system. I'd say it's somewhat chaotic, but, you know, I guess Dropbox, you know, just, you know, there's, you know, there is a system, and then you're trying to back that up maybe once a year to create digital archives. But it's just getting more and more and more, because even I don't know when I'll need it. You know, I just finished up an exhibition in Benalla, and going into that, we didn't know it, but we ended up doing a projection, you know, on the stage and in the town hall and a theatre. And luckily, I had a whole bunch of footage that I hadn't utilised, so I was able to put together, you know, a piece for that. And I didn't know the value of that until it happened. Yeah.
Jumaadi, do you have anything to say about your documentation? I don't. I think most conservators like to avoid documentation when we can. I'd like to thank you both for joining us today and for being so generous with your time and with your knowledge. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I hope you found this interesting, and I think we're continuing afterwards. So I don't know, but thank you for coming, and I wish you all a very lovely, happy evening. Bye-bye.